The morning sun poured across the neat row of pastel-painted houses, lighting up the manicured lawns and polished driveways of Miami's suburbs. From the outside, Elena Rivera's life looked enviable. She had a kindergartner daughter who giggled freely, a steady husband with a good job, and a home that seemed to hum with stability. But appearances were dangerous things. Shiny glass that cracked the moment one leaned too hard against it. Elena stood at the kitchen counter, her hands trembling slightly as she folded a letter back into its envelope. The paper carried words she had read 3 times already but could not force herself to accept. She pressed it flat beneath a cookbook, hiding it, as though its very presence might expose her to the sunlight spilling across the tiled floor. From the living room came the sound of Sophia's laughter. The little girl's voice was light, pure, the kind of sound that could cut through even the darkest clouds. Elena closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her, trying to believe it was enough to keep everything from unraveling. "Mommy, look!" Sophia called, holding up a crayon drawing as she bounded into the kitchen. Elena forced a smile, her lips stretching into the mask she had perfected over the years. "It's beautiful, mi amor," she whispered, pulling her daughter close. The drawing was of a sun, bold and bright, with 2 stick figures holding hands beneath it. One figure had long hair, the other short. No third figure was present. Eleanor's throat tightened. Daniel walked in moments later, briefcase in hand, his tie knotted perfectly. His smile was small, polite, never quite reaching his eyes. He pecked Elena's cheek in a gesture that felt rehearsed, then turned to Sophia, with a gentleness that seemed to exist only for his daughter. "You ready for school, Princessa?" he asked, crouching down to tie Sophia's shoelaces. Elena watched the scene, her chest tightening. There had been a time when Daniel looked at her with that same warmth. Now, their marriage was a shell, routine, brittle, cracked. They coexisted for Sophia's sake, for appearances, for the quiet fear of what might happen if truth was allowed to spill into daylight. After Daniel left for work, Elena carried the hidden envelope upstairs. She tucked it into a drawer beneath scarves she rarely wore. Her reflection in the mirror caught her eye. A woman in her early 30s, hair pulled neatly back, eyes ringed with exhaustion she couldn't quite disguise. She tried to tell herself it was nothing, that the letter's words were just speculation, paranoia, mistakes, but deep down, she knew better. Later, in the afternoon, while Sophia napped, Eleanor sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee gone cold. The neighborhood buzzed faintly with lawnmowers and children's bicycles, yet she felt strangely isolated, as though the walls around her home sealed her into a private prison. She thought about Daniel's brother, about the way he used to look at her years ago, before everything collapsed. She shook her head violently, as if the thought itself were poison. "Stop," she whispered to herself, gripping the coffee mug until her knuckles whitened. "It's in the past. It means nothing now." But the letter remained upstairs, silent and damning, waiting for the moment when her carefully constructed life could no longer contain the truth. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls in golden light, Sophia ran barefoot across the living room, her laughter filling the house once more. Elena smiled at her daughter, but behind that smile was a fissure, deep and spreading. A perfect life can shatter quietly, piece by piece, long before anyone dares to admit it's already broken. And soon, shadows from the past would return. Shadows that looked too familiar, too close to home. The morning sun spilled across the neat row of pastel-painted houses in Miami's quiet suburbs, glowing against manicured lawns and polished driveways. To the neighbors who glanced through half-open blinds, Elena Rivera's life looked enviable. She was the picture of motherhood, tending to her 5-year-old daughter with effortless grace. Her husband had a steady job. They lived in a house that seemed to hum with security, and together they wore the mask of perfection. But appearances were glass, and glass shatters with the slightest pressure. She stood at the kitchen counter, hands trembling as she folded a letter back into its envelope. The words inside had already burned themselves into her memory, each sentence carved deep, yet she read them again, unable to stop. She pressed the envelope flat beneath a cookbook, as though burying it could strip it of meaning. From the living room, Sophia's laughter rose like a bell, piercing Elena's chest with both comfort and sorrow. The little girl was radiant, unaware of shadows, her laughter the kind that made strangers smile in grocery aisles. Elena closed. Her eyes let the sound wash over her and pretended, for just a heartbeat, that it was enough to hold everything together. "Mommy, look!" Sophia called, running into the kitchen with a crayon drawing clutched in her hand. Elena bent down, forcing her lips into a smile, the mask she had perfected. "It's beautiful, mi amor." She kissed her daughter's hair, inhaling the warm scent of childhood. The drawing was of a sun, bright yellow rays streaming across the page. Beneath it, two stick figures stood hand in hand. One had long hair, the other short. But there was no third figure. No father. Eleanor's chest tightened as she held the paper. The front door opened. Daniel walked in, briefcase in hand, tie neat and sharp. He kissed Elena's cheek in a gesture that felt obligatory, practiced. Then his face softened as he crouched before Sophia, helping tie her shoelaces with a tenderness reserved only for his daughter. "You ready for school, princessa?" he asked gently. Elena watched him with hollow eyes. There had been a time when Daniel looked at her with that same warmth. But now their marriage was a house built on silence. They lived for Sophia's sake, for the stability of appearances, for fear of what might happen if the walls crumbled. After Daniel left for work, Elena climbed the stairs with the envelope clutched to her chest. She tucked it deep into a drawer beneath a pile of scarves she never wore. Her reflection in the mirror stared back, a woman barely into her 30s, hair perfectly tied, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She whispered to herself that it was nothing, that the letter was wrong, a mistake, paranoia. But the hollow feeling in her gut told her otherwise. That afternoon, while Sophia napped, Eleanor sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The hum of lawnmowers and the clatter of bicycle wheels filled the neighborhood, but she felt like she was listening from behind glass. Alone, sealed off, drowning in her own thoughts. She thought of Daniel's younger brother, the way his gaze lingered years ago, the reckless choices made in moments she wished she could erase. She shook her head, as if the thought itself were venom. "Stop," she whispered fiercely, gripping the mug until her knuckles turned white. "It's over. It means nothing now." But the envelope upstairs sat waiting, patient, undeniable. Truth doesn't vanish. It lingers, sharp-edged, biding its time. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses and painted the walls with gold, Sophia darted barefoot across the living room, her laughter filling every corner. Elena smiled, but the cracks in that smile deepened. A perfect life doesn't shatter all at once. It fractures quietly, piece by piece, until one day the break is impossible to ignore. And soon, a shadow from the past would return, smiling as though it had never left. The shadow returned on a humid, Miami evening, weeks after Eleanor had hidden the envelope that refused to stop whispering inside her drawer. The knock came at the door just after sunset, sharp and deliberate, the kind that made her stomach clench before she even opened it. When she pulled the door back, Daniel's younger brother stood there, Marco. He hadn't been seen in years, not since his reckless choices and bitter arguments drove him away from the family. Yet here he was, leaning casually against the frame, a smirk tugging at his lips, as if he had every right to stand on her doorstep. "Eleanor," he drawled, voice smooth, self-assured. "You look unchanged." Her throat dried. Behind her, Sophia's laughter echoed down the hallway, unaware of the man now stepping back into their lives. Eleanor tightened her grip on the door. "What are you doing here, Marco?" Before he could answer, Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. He emerged with the same brisk stride he always carried from work, briefcase swinging, tie loosened, his face lit up at the sight of his brother, surprise breaking the usual stiffness that lived there. "Marco," "You're back." Daniel's voice carried genuine joy, the kind Elena hadn't heard in years. He clapped his brother's shoulder, pulled him into a brief embrace. Marco smiled, eyes flicking over Daniel's shoulder toward her, lingering just long enough to unsettle. Dinner that night became an unplanned reunion. Marco slipped easily into conversation, his charm still intact, though sharpened with an edge of arrogance. He spoke of travels, of opportunities missed, of nights that blurred together in cities far away. Daniel hung on every word, desperate to believe his brother had finally grown. Elena said little, keeping her focus on Sophia, who scribbled at the table with crayons, blissfully unaware of the tension crawling beneath the surface. But every time Marco laughed, her stomach tightened. She remembered the way his eyes had once burned into hers, the one night that lived like a ghost between them. As the evening stretched, Marco leaned back in his chair, sipping from Daniel's glass. "Funny thing about family," he said casually, eyes sliding toward Elena. "No matter how far you run, blood has a way of pulling you back." Her hand froze mid-reach for the salt. Daniel chuckled, missing the weight of his brother's words. But Marco's smirk lingered, sharp, knowing, cutting straight through Elena's composure. Later, after Sophia had been tucked into bed, Elena stepped onto the back porch for air. The night was thick with humidity, cicadas buzzing in the trees. Marco appeared at the doorway, leaning against the frame. "You still hide it well," he said softly. "But I see it every time I look at her." Elena turned sharply, her voice a hiss. "Don't!" Marco raised his hands in mock innocence, eyes glinting. "Relax. I'm not here to ruin your picture-perfect life. I just wonder how long you think you can keep pretending." She stormed back inside, slamming the door behind her, her heart pounding like it might break free from her chest. Daniel, oblivious, called from the living room, asking if everything was all right. Elena forced herself to answer yes, though the lie tasted bitter. She caught sight of the closed drawer upstairs in her mind, the letter, the truth it contained, and felt the walls of her home close tighter. The shadow had returned, and with it, the secret she had spent years burying now stirred restlessly, waiting to surface. Elena couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, though the house was quiet. She found herself glancing at Sophia more often, as if the little girl might betray a secret without realizing it. At 5, Sophia was innocence embodied, a swirl of giggles and sticky fingers, but Eleanor began to notice patterns that gnawed at her peace. The tilt of her head, the way her eyes sparkled when she laughed, gestures so familiar they made Eleanor's chest tighten. She caught herself staring at a crayon drawing one afternoon, tracing the lines of Sophia's tiny hand with her fingertip. The stick figure with short hair, so ordinary to anyone else, seemed to carry a life of its own. Every time Sophia smiled, Elena saw it, the way her lips curled just like Marco's. The resemblance was small, almost laughable if it weren't so unbearable. She pressed her palms to her eyes, trying to make the thought disappear, but it lingered like smoke in a room with no ventilation. Daniel was oblivious. He still joked about bedtime stories and dinner routines, unaware that Elena's mind had started to fracture piece by piece. One evening, he leaned over Sophia's bed, smoothing back her hair. "Good night, Princessa. Dream of sunshine," he said softly. Eleanor's stomach churned. She realized the truth wasn't in Sophia's smile. It was in the tiny reflections she saw everywhere, echoes of a past she had fought to suppress. That night, Eleanor lay awake, listening to Sophia's soft breathing from the next room. Shadows from the corners of the bedroom stretched across the walls, making the familiar seem strange, sinister. She thought about Marco, the way he had smirked over dinner, the careless words that cut through the quiet like knives. He had returned, and suddenly, every innocent motion of her daughter became a question, every laugh a reminder of what had happened before, what could not be undone. She tried to remind herself of logic, of DNA and science, of time and distance. It wasn't her fault, she whispered, repeating it until the words became a fragile mantra. But her reflection in the hallway mirror betrayed her, hollow eyes staring back, pale and sleepless, a warning of how far she had already slipped into paranoia. By morning, Elena had started watching Sophia more intentionally. She lingered at the kitchen doorway while the girl ate cereal, eyes following every movement. When Sophia picked up a spoon, Elena's mind skipped. When she tilted her head to laugh at a cartoon, Elena flinched. There was something there, something undeniable, something that Marco had planted years ago and that now sprouted like poison. She began to replay memories in her mind. Marco's hands brushing hers in the kitchen years before, the late night, whispers she had dismissed as harmless flirtation, the reckless passion she thought she could forget. And now, in Sophia's eyes, in her laughter, in her tiny gestures, those memories found form, impossible to ignore. Elena knew she had to know for certain. The thought of it gnawed at her like an itch she couldn't scratch. She pictured a clinic, sterile and bright, the sterile swabs in their paper packets, the cold logic of science confirming what her eyes already screamed. Her heartbeat quickened at the idea. By afternoon, she had pulled her purse close and told herself it was only a precaution, only peace of mind, only a test. But deep inside, Eleanor knew that once the truth came back in ink and numbers, nothing would ever feel the same again. Sophia, laughter spilling around her like sunlight, remained oblivious. Yet Elena could not look away without seeing Marco's shadow lurking in every corner of the room, a ghost that had never really left. Hours later, she sat on the porch, cradling, her coffee like a shield, staring at the children riding bicycles down the street. The world continued, unaware of the storm gathering inside her home. Sophia's laughter drifted through the screen door, light and piercing, and Elena clutched the envelope in her mind, knowing that soon everything would change. Dinner that evening felt heavier than usual. The air in the dining room seemed thick, like it was waiting for a spark to ignite. Elena set Sophia's plate down, forcing her lips into the same practiced smile she had worn all week. Marco sat across from her, leaning back casually, a glass of wine in hand, watching the interactions, with eyes that never missed a detail. Daniel chatted about work, oblivious to the tension, throwing out anecdotes meant to entertain, unaware of the storm under his own roof. Sophia reached for her juice and giggled at a funny noise her father made. Eleanor's stomach twisted. Every movement of her daughter reminded her of Marco, as if the little girl carried the man's presence in her very bones. Her hands clenched the edge of the table, the knuckles whitening. Marco spoke suddenly, voice smooth and deliberate. "You know, children are funny. They have a way of showing you truths you might not want to see." Elena froze mid-bite, staring at him. There was nothing in his tone that gave him away, nothing overt. Just a casual, almost careless remark that carried a weight she couldn't ignore. She forced a laugh, choking it back, hoping Daniel wouldn't notice. Daniel, of course, did not. "What do you mean, Marco?" he asked lightly, brushing off the comment. Marco's smirk widened. "Oh, nothing. Just, sometimes family resembles one another more than you expect. You see it in the eyes, the hands, the way they smile at certain things. It's remarkable, really." Elena's fork fell from her hand with a clatter. She looked at Sophia, who was happily colouring on her plate with a grape, oblivious to the tension. Her laughter should have brought relief, but it only tightened the knot in Elena's chest. The resemblance Marco had always teased about, always hinted at behind polite words, now stared her down from across the table. After dinner, Elena cleared the plates mechanically, her mind racing. Marco lingered, asking questions about Sophia's routines, her school, her favourite books, all the while watching her with the patience of a predator waiting for a slip. Eleanor could feel it in her veins, a creeping sense of dread that made her chest ache. She could almost hear the whispering echo of his words. "They resemble more than you know." When Sophia was finally tucked into bed, Eleanor stood in the doorway, heart hammering. The room smelled faintly of lavender and crayons. Her daughter's soft breathing, a rhythm she both loved and feared. Marco's words circled in her mind relentlessly, like a melody with a sinister undertone she could not escape. She thought of Daniel, still laughing in the living room, oblivious. She thought of the envelope upstairs, the one she had hidden with such careful precision, containing a truth she could almost no longer deny. And she thought of Marco, sitting just a few feet away, smiling like he had known all along, like he had always known. Elena pressed her hands to her face, feeling the heat of panic rising. She tried to tell herself it was paranoia, that she was imagining things, that children simply share traits with family. But her eyes betrayed her, drawn to Sophia's innocent face, to the tiny flicker of a smile that was undeniably familiar in a way she hated. Later, in the quiet of the night, Eleanor heard the soft click of the front door as Marco finally left. She stood at the window, watching his silhouette disappear into the humid darkness, feeling a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that he was gone, and terror that he had come at all. His words, his eyes, his knowing smirk, they would not leave her. The whisper of his voice lingered in her mind, a shadow over her thoughts, threading through her fears. A truth too sharp to face, too close to ignore, and yet impossible to confront. She pressed her palm to her chest and exhaled slowly, feeling the walls of her home shrink around her. Soon, she knew, the private torment she carried alone would demand proof, would demand confrontation, and there would be no turning back from what she might uncover. The following morning, Elena woke with a sense of dread pressing against her chest, heavier than ever. The memory of Marco's words from the previous night lingered like smoke in a closed room, slipping into every quiet corner of her mind. She moved through the house mechanically, preparing breakfast for Sophia, her hands shaking slightly as she spread peanut butter across toast. The little girl chatted about school, about drawing rainbows, and Elena forced herself to nod and smile, but the mask felt thinner than ever. By mid-morning, while Sophia played with blocks on the living room floor, Elena found herself standing in the hallway, staring at the envelope she had hidden away weeks ago. Her fingers itched to open it, to touch the paper and let the words confirm what she feared. Instead, she shoved the thought aside. Today, she told herself, she would act. Today, she would know the truth, for better or worse. She called the clinic. In the neighboring district, her voice careful, calm, but betraying a tremor she couldn't hide. She scheduled an appointment, a discreet DNA test under the pretense of curiosity, a precaution she framed as responsible parenting. The receptionist's cheerful voice grated against her nerves, a jarring reminder of the ordinary world continuing, blissfully unaware of the storm inside her home. When the test day arrived, Eleanor felt a tight knot in her stomach as she carried Sophia into the sterile, brightly lit clinic. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and plastic chairs. Eleanor's hands trembled as she filled out forms, her mind racing with every possible outcome. She tried to calm herself by imagining the relief she would feel if it all proved unnecessary, if Sophia were Daniel's child. But deep down, she knew the truth she feared was already written in invisible ink across her daughter's tiny body. Sophia, cheerful and oblivious, giggled as she was guided to the testing room. She held Eleanor's hand tightly, trusting her entirely. Elena smiled down at her, heart aching with a strange, suffocating mix of love and fear. She watched the nurse carefully explain the process, the sterile swabs and tiny tubes, and Elena's hands remained clenched around her daughter's. Each small movement reminded her of the fragile line she was walking, a line between hope and disaster, between normality and chaos. After the brief procedure, Elena carried Sophia back to the car, trying to mask her own rising panic. Her thoughts spun, imagining every possible scenario. What would she do if the results confirmed what she already suspected? What if Daniel's life, her own life, were shattered beyond repair? Every possible future seemed to twist and writhe. In her mind, each one darker than the last. Driving home, Elena kept her eyes on the road, but her mind was elsewhere. locked in a labyrinth of memories and fears. She thought of Marco, his smirk, the casual cruelty in his remarks. She thought of Daniel, oblivious and trusting, and of Sophia, whose innocence might soon be violated by a truth she could not shield her from. Elena clenched the steering wheel, knuckles white, as she tried to anchor herself to the mundane world passing by in a blur of sunlit streets and humming air conditioners. At home, she set Sophia down on the porch swing, watching her spin slowly, her laughter bright in the afternoon. Son, Elena exhaled, a long, trembling breath, feeling a mix of love, guilt, and growing dread. The test would come back. There would be answers. And whatever those answers revealed, nothing would ever be the same. The envelope upstairs, the secret she had buried, and Marco's shadow looming in every glance now seemed more urgent than ever. Elena pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady herself, knowing the moment of truth was approaching. And deep inside, she understood that once the DNA results arrived, the fragile world she had built around her family might collapse entirely, leaving her trapped in a reality she was not ready to face. The envelope arrived on a humid Miami morning, slipping through the mail slot and landing on the doormat like a silent executioner. Elena's hands hovered over it for several long seconds, trembling, reluctant, almost afraid to lift it. Her heart hammered in her chest, a frantic drumbeat that seemed to echo through the empty house. The air was thick, heavy, suffocating, and even Sophia's innocent laughter upstairs could not pierce the tension. She picked it up at last, feeling the weight of paper and ink like a stone pressing against her palm. The clinic's return address was neat and official, a cruel contrast to the storm swirling inside her. She carried it upstairs to her bedroom, each step feeling slower than the last, as though the house itself were conspiring to delay the inevitable. Once inside, Eleanor locked the door, sliding the bolt into place with a shaking hand. She pressed, her back against it, her mind reeling with possibilities, unwilling to face them, yet unable to stop herself. The envelope trembled in her grip. Her breath came in shallow bursts. For a fleeting moment, she considered leaving it unopened, letting ignorance shield her. But she knew she could not. Not anymore. With hands that felt foreign, heavy, she slit the top of the envelope and pulled out the letter inside. She froze, staring at the stark words printed on sterile paper. Her name. Sophia's name. And then the truth she had tried so desperately to deny. The results. The DNA matched. Sophia was not Daniel's daughter. Not legally, not biologically. Marco. Her blood. Her secret. Her betrayal now etched in black and white. Elena sank to the floor, letting the envelope slip from her hands. Curling inward as though to protect herself from the reality of the words, she rocked gently, her body shivering with sobs that refused to fully break through. The world felt suddenly alien, twisted. The sunlight filtering through the curtains seemed too bright, too mocking, as though it had been waiting to reveal her. Guilt all along. Her thoughts spiraled, a dark kaleidoscope of rage, grief, and disbelief. How could this have happened? How could she have lived these years under a lie, carrying a child she had loved, yet never truly known? The betrayal was not only hers, she realized. Marco's casual cruelty had carved its mark into her life, but Daniel, his trust, his devotion, made the wound wider, rawer, bleeding in silence. Sophia's laughter echoed faintly from the next room, piercing through the fog of Elena's panic. She pressed her hands to her ears, willing herself to stop hearing it, willing herself to stop thinking about the tiny girl who had done nothing wrong, yet carried the weight of a secret, not her own. Her love for Sophia collided violently with her despair, a clash she could not reconcile. Elena's mind raced, plotting, calculating, imagining every outcome. The envelope sat on the floor beside her like a shard of glass, sharp and unyielding. She thought of Marco's smug expressions, the way he had hinted and teased, the glimmer of triumph in his eyes when he returned to Miami. And she thought of Daniel, waiting downstairs, unsuspecting, smiling, and completely vulnerable. The reality pressed down on her chest, relentless and suffocating. Her reflection in the mirror across the room startled her. A woman broken, hollow-eyed, trembling, staring back with the knowledge that life as she knew it was over. The truth had arrived, and with it, a darkness she could not escape. Hours later, Elena remained on the floor, rocking slowly, staring at the envelope, unable to move, unable to speak. Outside, the Miami sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the room, mocking her paralysis. The moment had come when secrets became unbearable, when lies could no longer shield the heart from reality. She realized, with a cold, sinking certainty, that nothing would ever be the same. And somewhere deep inside, a dangerous thought began to take root, as sharp and unrelenting as the edges of the envelope itself. A thought she knew she could not afford to ignore. The house felt smaller now, every corner pressing in on Elena, as though the walls themselves had taken sides. The envelope remained on the floor, its truth permanent, accusing, impossible to ignore. Daniel went about his day, as usual, humming softly while preparing lunch, completely unaware of the storm that had begun to consume his wife from the inside. Sophia ran around him, giggling, oblivious to the tension that hung like a storm cloud over the room. Elena tried to act normal, forcing herself to smile and speak, to laugh at the little girl's jokes. But every glance at Sophia, every gesture, every flicker of her eyes reminded her of Marco. The resemblance was undeniable, carved into the girl's tiny face and body like a mark she could not erase. Elena's hands shook as she poured juice, spilling a few drops onto the counter, and she forced herself to ignore it. Later, Daniel suggested a family outing, a walk along the boardwalk near the bay, hoping to enjoy the fading daylight. Elena nodded, agreeing mechanically, as if participating in the ritual might restore a sense of normalcy. She strapped Sophia into her car seat, her fingers lingering on the child's tiny shoulders longer than necessary, as though she were memorizing every inch of her before the truth poisoned it all. During the drive, Sophia chattered endlessly about school, about friends and drawings and stories she had invented. Eleanor answered, her voice tight, careful, as if she could contain the chaos inside her with polite words. Daniel laughed easily, throwing casual questions to both of them, oblivious to the tension that thickened every breath Elena took.